afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the Extreme Hangout at COP27. We have got a fantastic panel here for you. We are talking about one of the things that I think is very possibly not a magic bullet. There aren't any magic bullets out there, and we have to come together in so many different ways. But law and using the legal system for an unbelievably healthy and positive way. I mean, I can't think of anything that represents that better than stopping ecocide. And these panelists are here to discuss this today. So I'm going to leap off the stage fast and hand over to Lily, who's going to introduce everybody. And we're going to explore what all of this means. Thank you so much for coming today.
Yeah, okay, on. I worked out. Great to be here. Thank you everyone who's come, and thank you to everyone who's joined us in this panel. I'm really excited to dive into this conversation because I first came across Ecocide when I was writing a book on climate solutions. And in a chapter, I look at the different legal tools that people have been using to try and stop the sixth mass extinction. And was really, my mind was blown by Ecocide for its kind of obviousness and its simplicity. And whilst kind of voluntary action has gotten us so far, it's very clearly not gotten us far enough. And Ecocide feels like a really important tool to try and maybe just make the bottom threshold higher of what's allowed to happen on this planet. So yeah, I am really excited to learn more from our panelists today on their views on Ecocide and progress, and you know where we've got to in this movement. So we'll be doing the rounds today. And I thought I'd also read a quote from a Ukrainian MP that was said this week as a message to COP. Yulia Okinukova published this week a message saying the war in Ukraine is undoing decades of development and preventing climate action. The world must unite around established principles of ecocide and environmental protection in conflict. And it's interesting to see how many politicians around the world are calling for ecocide as a tool to help with the different crises that we're facing. So first off, I'll introduce you, Willie Mazak, and I'd love you to maybe tell us a bit more about yourself and your representation of Vanuatu and where Vanuatu sits on this trajectory towards ecocide. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, moderator, and I'm so honored to be here among those distinguished panelists and distinguished audience. My name is William Misak. I'm from Vanuatu. I am the advisor to the Vanuatu Climate Action Network and the founder and executive director of a local NGO called Learn to Save Vanuatu. Actually, I'm here at COP as the Vanuatu negotiator on loss and damage. So, and also as a youth on different side events to push for ICJA.
And what is the progress in terms of Vanuatu's attempt to put ecocide into policy? I read about this a few years ago with Polly Higgins speaking, that she was speaking with Vanuatu to be the potential first call for the signatories to add ecocide to the Rome Statute. Has that been done? Why has that not been done? Like, where are you at in that process?
Yeah, thank you. The Vanuatu's position on ecocide is quite clear. The Vanuatu will support the ecocide and continue to push as a state into UN spaces to make sure that with other countries to push and put it into the Rome Statute. And at the moment, Vanuatu is focusing on the ICJO, the International Court of Justice Advisory Opinion on climate change, and we believe that as a spearhead on the climate justice at the international level, we will also looking at other international laws that can prevent a human dignity destruction that will Ecocide, and we have also EAT-LOS, that is also the other, the law of the sea, which Vanuatu is also looking at supporting it. In terms of EAT-LOS, Ecocide, sorry, in Vanuatu, when we look at the Ecocide, we view it not only an international issue, but also a national and regional issue that each country have to look at it and address it. Even in Vanuatu, at the local level, we see companies that are developing, businesses, projects that are really destructive as well from in terms of environmental destruction. From my personal story, we even in Vanuatu we have a company that is working on the road development with no proper rehabilitation plan. However, this doing destruction and then leave it back to local communities to start recover from that, trying to find ways to recover from it. So this position is quite really clear, because we understand that it's not only for a local or a national country like Vanuatu. Even though it is a very small country, we understand that that will be for justice and the betterment for the whole world. And what we've seen that in that pushing forward for the Ecocide, we have a very good example where we're looking at we learn from the International Court of Justice advisory opinion, how it push not only within the political sphere but also beyond the political sphere, is how the young people also contributing on that as one of the very proactive group that are leading. And we have no doubt, myself as a youth contributing on the negotiation of the Vanuatu government within the loss and damage, I see that there's that space and the concern of protecting environment among young people becoming one of the center that the young people will start looking at it. And they will for sure contributing on whether it at the national or regional or international level, contributing on making sure that we protect our environment, and also having Ecocide as a law that will protect our globe for our future, of course.
And do you think there's an intersection between Ecocide law and loss and damage? Could Ecocide be used in any way as a tool for getting loss and damage compensation? Sure.
When we're looking at the disruption that the climate change is taking when it comes to loss and damage, we focus on that perspective of the climate change impact. But when we're looking at also human impact, it's also causing the same losses where we look at maybe categorizing it on different level of. But when we speak about loss and damage, when we are looking at how companies are developing their businesses, or even an industry is setting up in an area, and we're talking about the loss of the cultural heritage that are in place, we for sure look at that as sort of a thing that we can synchronize it and make it. And we believe that when we have if we have we have all the political wills for the ICJ-AO, this will also give us a sort of window where we can learn more about it, on how we can, taking in the Ecocide in that whole discussion as well. I'm not the lawyer in background, sorry, but I'm pretty sure that there will be way to find that way to put these things together. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, on the point of law, let's move over to Leah Wyman, who is a training lawyer at the University of Edinburgh. Can you tell us a little bit about your work, the legal tools you think are really exciting right now, including Ecocide, and anything you'd like to share on this topic?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a pleasure being here today, and I think it's especially something that's exciting for us as young people, because it's really frustrating seeing all the things that are happening to the world and to our earth and our future and our home, and realizing that there's actually currently all of these things are still legal. Like, it is legal to kill our future, and it's legal to kill our environment, and that is just unacceptable. And I think Ecocide is something that just makes it clear that is not allowed anymore. And it's something that just makes so much sense. And I studied global environment climate change law last year in Edinburgh, and that was one of the first things that really sprung out to me. That gives me hope within the legal sphere, and using law as a tool to create new moral parameters, and create a deterrence at an international level that holds actors accountable that are committing ecocides, especially because yes, we have national laws, and some countries have stronger environmental national laws than others. But at an international level, let's say a company isn't allowed to do certain activity in one country, it can go to another country. And I think that's why looking at ecocide at an international level is so important, because we need to set those parameters that just make it immoral across the globe, so that it's not just moved, and an activity that is harmful to the planet isn't just moved to another part of the country. And I think that's something very exciting, and I think it's so amazing to be part also of Youth for Ecocide, to see that movement grow, and to see so many people, young people, take this forward. And I think it's really powerful, because that way we have we're putting pressure, and we saw this in Stockholm. We're still seeing this now, I think at COP as well. It's coming into youth policy papers. It's being discussed at levels, and people at all levels sort of are bringing this forward and saying, we want something that can safeguard our future and can safeguard our planet and keep us within planetary boundaries.
And do you think, I mean, there's clearly a rising appetite for ecocide in environmental circles. I mean, I think it's very, very clear it's become a bigger and bigger conversation, and increasingly politicians, as I mentioned at the beginning. I'm curious if you have a sense of the legal world's response to this movement, and if there is a growing kind of appetite amongst lawyers to develop better environmental protection frameworks through the law.
Yes, I think definitely it's a term that has become, just people know about it. I think especially with the definition, the legal definition that was put forward by an independent expert panel last year in 2021. It's something that is really being discussed within within law, even within law school, of teaching us about it, we're talking about it. I think sometimes there's, at an academic level, there's always a lot of discussion back and forth, the pro and the benefits, or how real it really is. And I think it's more concrete even than it's seen in the academic world. I think sometimes it's still seen as this concept without realizing how much already this is within the highest policy level within the discussions of the UN. So I think that's really cool.
And without wanting to put you on the spot, because I don't expect you to know it off by heart, for anybody who's not familiar with the definition that was put forward, could you summarize what the kind of agreed definition of ecocide might look like?
Yeah. Ecocide means unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there's a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts.
And is the idea that it would not be retrospective, that it would be forward-looking?
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, we'll circle back to this later in the conversation, some of the barriers to being implemented. Thank you. I'll move now to Dani Kayla, an Indigenous artist, and with quite an amazing journey, including you're going to go to the Antarctic, from what I can see. Or you've been to the Antarctic. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how Ecocide feeds into your work?
Tanse Kapewawa Sakni Sigasun Nianahea Square Tante Koakatu Sikochinia. So hello and how are you? My name is Comes Lightning and my English name is Dani Keeler. I'm a Plains Cree woman from Coakatoos First Nations on Treaty 4 territory in the country known as Canada. I am an Indigenous artist. I am the manager of 7Gen, an Indigenous youth-led organization aimed at sustainability and creating renewable energy projects for sustainability in their home communities. And I am also the auntie of Antarctica. So I was the first First Nations person from Canada to be a participant of the 2041 Foundation and the first First Nations person to step foot on the continent. So that is who I am and the work that I do with 7Gen. I'll start with like 7Gen. Where we got our name is this ideology, indigenous ideology, and it started 7 generations ago. So our elders had this prophecy, and that it was going to be in the next 7 generations to come, it will be the 7th generation that puts forth a new action plan and will change the world for the better for everybody. And I am part of the 7 generations, so is my entire team, and the generation right now. And we are all we are all youth. So youth perspective is so important in these spaces because we're the ones that are going to be having the innovative ideas and all of that stuff to create sustainable solutions. And one of our biggest commodity that we have is traditional ecological knowledge. And so how this all relates to Ecocide is in order to create policies within governments and with structure, you have to understand the land. And one of the biggest things that you need to do is create partnerships with indigenous people all across the world, because there's so much traditional ecological knowledge that we share that is critical to the preservation of Mother Earth. So they know different water streams. For agriculture, they know where to plant the foods. They like the importance of water, the intersection of land, water, and people, biodiversity, how ecosystems run. And this is all ancestral knowledge. This isn't just something that they observed like scientists and then made hypothesis and all that stuff. It's something that we live and breathe. It's embedded within our DNA. And so it's so important to have indigenous people in these conversations in law. So where I'm from in Canada, I have a really good friend. She just became 3rd vice chief of FSIN. I forget what FSIN stands for. But yeah, she is the 3rd vice chief, and she's also an indigenous lawyer. I went to university with her. And she is working with people in New Zealand because in New Zealand, they actually made water rights. So Mother Earth is a living, breathing being. She is our mother. She is the mother to everybody here. And she's not just a dead thing that we just live on. That she is the reason why our food grows, why we have water, and water is life. And so in New Zealand, they made a river a living being. They give it its actual rights. So, and this is something that we're working towards, right? And it started with the indigenous people because they know the water systems, they know how important it is, they know the knowledge of the land, and this is something that's critical. They're getting rights for mountains in Sweden. I think they did one in Sweden too. I'm not too 100% sure about that one. But in Canada, we are collaborating with the New Zealand people because we want to bring back that, and we want to implement these teachings and to create laws and policies to protect the land, to protect water systems, to protect, biodiversity itself. So we can, for the next future generations, not only survive, but they thrive again with Mother Earth. And when I talk about the next generation, we don't think in span of 10 or 50 to 100 years. We're talking about 500 years. Like the name of the organization that I'm managing is 7Gen. So it's the next 7 generations and beyond that we are always looking for and carrying after and making sure that we're doing our due diligence to make sure that they survive.
I love that. Thank you. I was sitting next to Hindu Ibrahim last night at dinner, and we were talking about how extraordinary it is that there's often quite similar messages that come from different indigenous communities around the world, even though they're in different continents, different countries, different places. And in terms of the language often used around Mother Earth and this kind of sanctity of Earth. And the other thing she noted was the 7-generation principle, that you find the 7-generation principle in many different indigenous communities around the world, often thinking back 7 generations and thinking forward 7 generations. And so I'd never heard that idea of a prophecy that's very optimistic that this next 7 generations will be the ones that solve the problem. It's a beautiful reflection of that idea. Do you think, and forgive me if I don't know how to frame this in a way that doesn't let's see if I can frame this in the right way. I was just thinking through as you were talking that we have the Western system of law, right, that we're using and Ecocide is trying to speak to. Interestingly, I interviewed Namonte Nemquimno earlier this year, an incredible indigenous activist from Ecuador, and she's very, very, very critical of the West and has written some beautiful, damning articles about Western civilization killing our planet. But I asked her, is there anything about the West that you think is positive and that we should kind of aspire to look after and keep? And it was interesting, her response. She said the law, that she feels like our legal systems are, if used properly and if actually followed, really powerful, helpful things. And actually she helped manage a case that used the law to kick an oil company out of her indigenous homeland in Ecuador. And I was thinking as you were speaking that indigenous communities that I've spent time with don't necessarily have a kind of formal legal system in the way that we have it in the West, with so much complexity, but there is sort of a softer legal system there in the sense of like common laws, that principles, rules that the communities abide by. And so do you think that, at least in the community that you come from and represent, there is a Ecocide as a kind of formal Western law actually speaks to a kind of unwritten but known law that is already present in indigenous communities such as your own?
Yeah, so with us, with our law system, like indigenous people, it's totally different than the Western way of doing things. But what I believe, so it's not probable that, Western society or Western ways of thinking and all that stuff are just gonna poof, disappear, right? That's not gonna happen. So what I believe is that we have to merge Western ways of thinking, Western science specifically, with traditional ecological knowledge and merging the two. And this is the step forward and one of the biggest puzzle pieces of how we can actually contribute to sustainable solutions and get into the conversations and start collaborating and making meaningful relationships with other people, because it's going to take a village, it's going to take the entire world. It's going to take collaboration. It's going to be working with other nations, other people, other mindsets, other languages, everything. And so that's one of the biggest keys that we have to start doing, and just shifting that mindset of, just monetary gain. We got to start thinking that, Mother Earth is our biggest commodity. She is the reason why we are here. She's our source of life. And if we keep, extracting and abusing her, it's not Mother Earth that, needs saving, because she can save herself. She'll take us out with tsunamis, tornadoes, wildfires. Canada's always burning up every summer. And climate change, it's us. We need to save ourselves, and we need to connect with each other, with ourselves, so we can reconnect with Mother Earth and, create those sustainable solutions so we all can be together, and live.
Thank you. And when you say you see your indigenous legal system as being very different, can you explain that, elaborate a little bit further? In what ways?
So it's not in the jurisdictions of Canada, so to speak. With us, it's more about forgiveness. It's about teachings. It's way different than, structured documents, policies, and all that stuff, because we come from an oral tradition, and a lot of our teachings come from storytelling. So when you get in trouble, in your tribe or wherever you're from in your community, then, you talk to the elders. And then the elders are very, it's they say riddles, but in their storytelling, but it has a meaning to it, and it has a purpose. And then along your life, and when you finally figure out what that riddle meant, then that's how you get forgiveness, I guess, but how you realize the wrongdoings that you did, or there's just different things like that. It's not the way that the Western world is at all.
Makes sense. But do you think within that framework there is a sort of equivalent of Ecocide, i.e. an understanding that one should not completely destroy the environment? It's an obvious question, but I'm just curious if you do see echoes of this in kind of oral tradition.
Oh yeah, that was the biggest no-no in my culture, because we are so embedded with Mother Earth. Our culture and traditions are intertwined with the teachings of Mother Earth, and that is we've been A1 since day one in sustainability, right? Like we've always been stewards of the land. We hold 4% of the world's population, but yet we protect 80% of the world's biodiversity, which is absolutely crazy because there should be more percentage of people everywhere. But yeah, so our teachings are intertwined and embedded with being stewards of the land, being environmental stewards. And so with the teachings and the legal side, or it's you just do not abuse Mother Earth because that is our earth. And we, in our language, it's inanimate and inanimate things, and it's very poetic and it's all connected. So even the rocks have spirits, you know, like living and non-living things alike all have spirits and are all connected with that make us all whole. And so this is something that us as Indigenous people, we understand. And it's, yeah, rule number one, you do not abuse Mother Earth because she takes care of us and gives us life.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to move over to you now, Maria Aguilar, Colombian lawyer. And again, we'll go deep again on law. I'd love your thoughts on Ecocide specifically, and also if there are other legal routes that you think are really promising for protecting our planet.
Thank you. So I'm just going to very briefly introduce myself, Maria Aguilar from Colombia. Yes, my background is in law, but I don't practice. I have been working more in advocacy research. I have a master's degree in sustainability science. So it's kind of like a multidisciplinary approach to the climate crisis. I have been working, advocating for climate justice, as I mentioned, had the opportunity to work in Colombia with local communities, indigenous peoples from the Amazon Piedmont. And I think stopping ecocide, the movement, is just the next logical step that we need. We know, and just a couple of weeks ago, the United Nations Environmental Program presented the 13th edition of the Emissions Gap Report. And the news are not news, but it's disencouraging. And this is just the next logical step. We need something that helps us catalyze the systemic change that we need, and we need it now. So having an extra layer, what do we do when national jurisdictions don't live up to their already existing commitments? There is this gap that stopping ecocide is filling, right? So having the opportunity to hold those that are massively damaging the environment, fueling the climate crisis, accountable. And I see that this is at the core of climate justice. We know that just a few people, companies have been causing this problem. And for communities in the front lines, for countries in the global south, I think this is extremely important tool. And it's innovative, but it's the legal system evolving and living to the moment.
And are there any other tools, legal tools, that you think we should be, kind of cognizant of and advocating?
Yes, I think it of course is linked to human rights, right? So climate action needs to have a human rights-based approach. When we talk about advancing climate action, we're talking about strengthening indigenous people's rights. We're talking about having the opportunity to, as I mentioned, hold those that are polluting our water, fueling the fires in the Amazon accountable. And so I think this is a legal tool that we need. I think it's going to happen. It will take some time. But if we think about it, maybe Jojo, you can talk about a bit of the history of how the International Criminal Court functions and whatever. But yeah, it's the world is changing, it's moving. And in loss and damage, I think this is a great tool, right? Because it gives the opportunity of frontline communities as well to ask for reparations economically, but also symbolically, if this comes to play someday. So definitely.
Yeah, I'm not sure if any of you missed it, but yesterday, I think it was yesterday, the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, has called for 10% of oil and gas companies' profits from to be funding loss and damage, which this year alone would result in nearly $50 billion. It's like hard to put into words how like obvious that like how is it even a conversation that should be happening.
What would happen if these companies don't do that, right? But countries like Vanuatu keep feeling and experiencing and living the losses and damages and what cannot be brought back.
But
So then we have Ecocide.
No, then the other statistic I came across this morning was that we've got more. I think it's like 600 delegates. Sorry, 600 of the attendees are from the oil and gas industry, which is a big 730, which is a bigger delegation than any country, as far as I could read. So how? Maybe over to you now, Jojo. Like, what is stopping us doing this? If it seems to be so clear, you've got many studies that show majority support for significant climate action around the world. You've got people taking to the streets and getting arrested and going on hunger strikes because they're just listening to the science. And yet we are going closer and closer to the edge of the abyss, as the UN Secretary General puts it. What are the barriers that have stopped laws like Ecocide and maybe other laws like them coming into place already, and how can we work against those obstacles?
This is really interesting.
Sorry to introduce, Jojo is the co-founder of Ecocide. She co-founded it with the late Polly Higgins.
Woo! I'll just quick correction there, co-founder of Stop Ecocide.
Oh yeah.
what we don't want is Ecocide, right? So this is about Ecocide law and stopping Ecocide. It's a really interesting question, and interestingly, we often get asked this by journalists and moderators and so on. What are the obstacles? I have to say the biggest obstacle is information, because when it comes down to it, we have yet to encounter anybody one-to-one who thinks this is a bad idea. You saw how brief the core definition is that came out last year from this legal panel. It fits on the back of a business card, which is actually a fantastic advantage if you're dealing with politicians, because they never want to read a 20-page report. As I say, it's very hard to hear that definition and say, well, no, that shouldn't be a crime. No one's going to do it. And we're actually already at a point where governments would be embarrassed to say we don't want to do this. But a lot of them still don't even know about it. And 3 years ago, literally, this was not a conversation at all at the diplomatic level. Now there are at least 25 countries which are members of the International Criminal Court, which have discussion of criminalizing ecocide on public record, either at parliament level or government level or both. So this is a very, very fast-growing conversation. So, I would say that literally the main obstacle to this is simply people's awareness of its possibility and what it can do. And I think part of that is also to do with a misconception around perhaps misconceptions around criminal law and around what it can do, because it tends to be thought of as an area of law that is made up of sticks. It's what you use to punish people with. It's where you put the boundaries. That is really important. Of course, that's what this does. Is it puts in place an outer boundary. And one of the things that I found fascinating over the last few days in the various panels and discussions that I've been in is so many people saying, but there are laws, but they're not being followed and they're not being enforced. There's actually a huge body of environmental law in the world, but it's not well enforced at all. And that comes down, again, this is all binds together. It's fascinating because that really comes down to what Danny was talking about, which is about connection to the planet. We don't have a strong sense of actually being part of nature. We've spent 500 years, more, actually thousands of years probably in the Western thinking tradition, of kind of becoming separate from nature and thinking of ourselves as lords and masters of nature, separating spirit from body or separating reason from nature. These kind of dualisms that run all the way through that mean that we don't take environmental law as seriously as we do other kinds of law. So we don't take, so in a sense, there's one of your barriers. It's that understanding. So again, it's the information, the understanding. And so putting in place an international level crime that says the worst harms to nature are as bad as the worst harms to people, what you're doing is you're actually putting a kind of foundational piece in place that shores up all of that existing law, and that basically says, okay, you may think you're just in breach of a regulation and so nobody's going to notice, but hey, if you're actually creating a level of severe or widespread or long-term harm, now that actually lifts it to the level of an international crime. And that's like a moment where people go, whoa, hold on a minute. This is my personal freedom on the line. But of course, if you're a corporate officer, it's not just your personal freedom. It's your reputation. It's your job reputation. But it's also the reputation of your company. And that matters hugely because that's what your stock value depends upon. And so there's a huge kind of deterrent potential there. And that comes back to this slight misconception about criminal law, because actually, what is criminal law there for? It's actually there to protect. Yes, it's capable of punishing, which is one of the reasons it has that enforceability. But it's there to prevent the crimes from happening. Murder is a crime so that we don't kill each other, right? And that's the whole kind of inspiration around it, I guess, is that it creates this level of protection. But also that it actually gives us an ability, and this is what you were saying, Lily, just now, about how come we're not moving faster? We all know what's happening. We all know why it's happening. But it's like everybody's a bit stumped as to how it can happen. And perhaps this framework can do something towards actually steering the thinking and the funds as well in a new direction.
Thank you. I'm wondering about additional obstacles from the fossil fuel lobbyists and also from specific countries, bearing in mind that based on my memory of, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, of researching this, that when the Rome Statute was originally drafted, ecocide was actually apparently in there alongside genocide and the other international crimes we're aware of, and that it was only a handful of countries that removed ecocide from that. So maybe could you speak a little bit to that history, and if we have the same threats today, that there will be a handful of companies and countries lobbying quite hard to ensure that this doesn't go through?
There is certainly that in the history. I mean, actually, one of the things that inspired Polly Higgins to get into sort of the advocacy of the criminal law side was the discovery that the drafting of the Rome Statute, which is the governing document of the International Criminal Court, and is the one that that lists war crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity. When it was being drafted, there was a clause that would have addressed severe environmental harm, and it didn't make it to the final cut. And there were certain countries that stood in the way. There was never a vote as such, but it sort of got quietly dropped. And we do know that the UK, the US, France and the Netherlands were all involved in that, and Brazil at one point also raised an objection. Very interesting that those are all oil countries, and also at the time were also exploring nuclear. So that gives some explanation as to perhaps why it didn't reach the statute. And actually it's worth maybe pausing a moment to think about what world we might be in now had it reached the statute 20 years ago when the International Criminal Court opened its doors. We could well be in a very, very different and much more positive situation. But we do believe there is a real difference in what's happening now. Yes, there may well be fossil fuel lobbyists behind closed doors trying to make sure this doesn't happen. But you know what? They're never going to say it publicly. Why? Because they've spent 20 years greenwashing, spending billions of dollars on that. As soon as they publicly say this shouldn't be a law, that trashes everything they've done. So they're not going to do that. They're going to keep it very quiet. And in the same way, I mean, a few years ago, it would have perhaps been more controversial, but I believe that we're already at the point where governments, even quite conservative politicians now, are saying to us, we know this is coming, we just don't know when. Of course, subtext is we're not sure we're ready. But the fact is that there is an inevitability about this. And we see ourselves really as just accelerating the inevitable, because sooner or later we're going to have to put something in place that prevents us from shooting holes in the boat that we're in, right, all of us. And of course it's no good pointing a finger and saying, well, you're the one making the hole in the boat. It's like, hello. So no government is going to actively come out and say, no, this shouldn't happen, because they're just going to look awful. But what they will do is they might kind of shuffle to the side a bit and go, oh, well, we don't know if we're ready, or maybe we should look at something else. But that's another reason why this whole discussion is best held in the public space, because that's where it's very difficult to oppose. So although there may well be objectors, it's very hard for them to be public with it, which really hands over the power to those of us with the voices. And that is obviously a conversation that is expanding as rapidly as possible, and we're pushing that as fast as we can.
And in terms of the opportunity for putting this into action, I know a few years ago, as I mentioned, Vanuatu was being talked about as potentially the first country to table it so that there would be a vote. Is that likely to happen? Are there any other kind of key levers or moments you see unfolding in the next year, 2 years, to try and build momentum on this?
Absolutely, and it was indeed Vanuatu that brought Ecocide back onto the diplomatic stage in 2019 by calling for the International Criminal Court's Assembly of State Parties to seriously consider adding it. And of course that sort of kicked off, if you like, the diplomatic conversation that's been massively enhanced by the arrival of the definition and so on. The actual procedure is that a state or a group of states needs to propose it formally, but in fact it's also about sort of a kind of working group within the International Criminal Court, if you like, and actually that's based in New York, where countries can discuss this as an amendment to the statute. And it requires at least 2/3, ultimately, of the member states to agree in order for it to go forward. So what we're currently working with Vanuatu on is bringing together an informal group of a cross-regional group of states that are willing to move forward on this and expand the discussion. We actually suspect that within the next year to a year and a half, it's entirely possible that a proposal could be on the table from a small group of states. So, you know, we actually didn't expect things to move this fast. So when people say, when do you expect this to be in place? And we've been sort of giving a kind of ballpark figure of maybe sort of 5 years. You know, so far things have been going faster rather than slower than we anticipated in the last couple of years. Because, of course, the climate, I mean, obviously the climate is different, literally, but the political climate as a result is also different. So there is this kind of sense of urgency that means that an amendment could take a lot shorter time than amendments have taken in the past.
Woo! Last question for you, and then I'll go to the floor if anyone has any other questions to all of our panelists. So say, you know, in the next year to 2 years, the proposal's made, and I don't know how long it would take, but, you know, say in a wonderful world, in the next few years it becomes an international crime and is accepted as such. Curious question, how much do you believe in then, once Ecocide is established as an international crime, the International Criminal Court's ability to actually use it against particularly Western countries?
This is a very good question, and the International Criminal Court has been criticised for almost being a sort of neo-colonial institution in and of itself. It's done very few prosecutions, mostly of African nationals and so on. So,
hence the question.
Yeah, exactly. So these are, you know, most of the criticisms of the ICC are probably justified. However, it is a unique mechanism. Apart from the fact that the Rome Statute sort of lists the crimes that are generally considered to be the worst crimes, and so obviously from a sort of moral and sort of cultural point of view, it's important to place Ecocide there. But also it has a unique mechanism of complementarity, where effectively it's the only global mechanism that kind of taps into the criminal justice systems of its member states. So if you ratify a crime there, you can enforce it in your own domestic legislation, and often countries will then legislate to match the international crime. And what that means is that Ecocide could be prosecuted in any ratifying jurisdiction. So people often think that the ICC, you know, a prosecution would have to be taken at the ICC. And if you're a war criminal, that may end up being the case because your own country's not going to prosecute you. But with Ecocide, because it's largely a corporate crime, it could actually potentially be prosecuted anywhere that it's happening that is a ratifying state, or anywhere that has a link to where it's happening that is a ratifying state. And some states even use what's called universal jurisdiction or universal competence. And Belgium's an interesting case actually in this context. And Belgium is very exciting in this context as well, because just a few days ago, their government has put forward a bill to criminalise ecocide. So this is the first European country to do this and to make it a standalone crime, or they will be doing. And the definition is quite similar to the international one. So I think we need a little hooray at that. Woo! But they have historically used this principle of universal jurisdiction. If they decided to do that, I mean, obviously they have to decide to do it, but if they decided to do it with Ecocide, they could literally arrest anyone going through their territory that they think has committed ecocide. So the breadth of potential prosecution is actually a lot broader than it initially looks like. So there is kind of, quite a wide potential there. And ultimately, it will be individual nations that take the prosecutions. But by going for the international level, firstly, we're underscoring the importance. But secondly, we're also acknowledging that biggest environmental damage is committed by transnational corporations, that have this ability, as Leah was saying, to sort of move across borders. But also that by legislating at that level, what people ratify nationally will be in keeping and will be coherent. Because if we were to go nation by nation by nation, we could be here for the next 50 years and have about as many different definitions as you like. But by going for the international level and by having this definition that's so internationally credible, we're actually creating a kind of coherence within the movement and amongst those politicians who are talking about it.
Amazing answer. Thank you. I'm so happy to hear that. All right, so thank you all so much. I'm going to open to the floor. If anyone has questions, please raise your hand.
Hi there. First of all, I just want to say how amazing it is to see the progress on Stop Ecocide and what a fantastic job you're doing. It really is completely incredible. So thank you. Thank you. I guess I'm interested in the power of civil action, civil society as well. And I notice that in some protests now, in some of the street demonstrations, that people are carrying signs for Stop Ecocide. So my first question is, what do you think about the power of people to actually push this forward amongst governments? And can we make this Stop Ecocide kind of campaign theme almost part of what people are talking about on their signs as they're protesting to help with that? And then secondly, my other question is around the lawyers. I mean, we just don't have enough environmental lawyers training, I don't think. And how do we address that problem so we can really help skill up young people, but also people wanting to retrain as environmental lawyers? So is that something also that's perhaps an opportunity that would help to push the movement? So over to whoever.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. The questions. Firstly, as an activist, I mean, it's really exciting sort of having these discussions on the street and also seeing more people sort of recognize what it is, and just carrying that banner, I think, is really powerful, because you start these conversations with people, and like we said, like Jojo said earlier, some of the biggest problems is around knowledge, and it's around people maybe not really knowing what does ecocide really mean. What does it mean from a legal perspective? Is it something that is actually that can be enforced? So I think there's so much everyone can do in bringing this forward, and I think this is where it comes out as a call to audience and everyone like listening to this, to really step onto this wagon and help spread the message and help bring it out there, whether that is in the streets, whether that is through talking to people, whether that is at a company level or wherever your workplace or voice is. I think there's room for everyone, and I think that's also exciting within Stop Ecocide, having these different initiatives of like Artists for Ecocide or whatever it is. You don't have to be a lawyer in order to promote Stop Ecocide and in order to help this become a reality. And we really do need everyone on board and need to spread it globally. And I think, secondly, around lawyers, I think it's interesting because studying specifically environmental law, I think it's almost within every sector within society that we need to bring environmentalism in. And I think actually universities have a big role to play in this, in making sure that environmental law isn't just in the environmental law courses, it's in every single course. And the same goes for any other subject. And I think that's the most powerful thing that within education that can happen, to bring sustainability, to bring ecocide and the knowledge around that into the education system, not just as a separate subject if you study biology or geography or whatever, but into every sphere. But because at the end of the day, for our future, we all need to know what these concepts mean. This is about, like, it touches all of our lives. Whatever anyone ends up doing, whether that's on the creative sphere, legal sphere, in medicine, all of this touches upon our planetary health and upon ecocide. And that's where it's just so exciting, where we need everyone on board. And it's also really cool to see schools take that up, universities take that up, and everyone can play a role to actually make that happen within your country, within your universities, your institutions. So thank you.
Hi, my name is Anna. I would like to make a question for Willy and Maria Alejandra about how this concept of Stop Ecocide is getting into the regions in Africa and Latin America, because you mentioned a lot of European countries, but how the people is getting into these concepts in the regions where we have also less education and knowledge and people getting involved in these concepts.
Thank you. I think one of the things that how the concept is getting into the community for Vanuatu, while we have our independence in 1980, the preamble of our constitutions really lays out that everything that the government do have to also have the Melanesian value, and the Melanesian value is the value of indigenous people, which means that sometimes when we have political issue, the indigenous coming in to advise the government. And I think this is from the foundation of many things, and also came to the question why Vanuatu is leading on that other international level. And the concept is quite easy in terms of that, because most of the people in Vanuatu are indigenous. So sometimes when we look at the definition of indigenous, we find ourselves lost in it, because we are mostly indigenous people across the country, and the government the government depends on the advice from the indigenous people to advance. And from that, it's really clear when we see big companies coming in, and as my colleague here mentioned, of course we just see it happening, and this is where something comes out and people start questioning about this and that, and if there is if there is a law preventing this at the national level and so on. And I think one of the other thing is that it's because Vanuatu has only 300,000 people, a very small number of people, and anything's happen, we making sure that the information are spreading in every level, so that everyone are aware of what is happening. And this is something that we see, that awareness or advocacy around anything that we have. For example, the ICJAO, when the Vanuatu government announced it in 2019 that it will start looking at the legal avenue for climate change, 2 months later, almost many people in Vanuatu, because they see the impact of climate change, they've been asking questions about it. And when they heard about it, they give their support to the government. And even indigenous people, they say that this is a right way to go. For Ecocide, at the moment when we talk about it, some of the, because of the isolation of the different islands, where the big developments are happening, those the communities in that start talking about it. And the government looked at, no, this is something that you have to, because they have also the advice and the voices coming out from the chiefs, where they're looking after the whole people. So they were like, okay, we have to look at this. So that's why when we heard about that, the government doesn't ask any question, but trying to understand and get it in, to start looking at it. So I think it's the way is that as we are not a lawyer to understand that, we just look at it and we start talking about it. And I think the advantage is that because we have that the 100% of the land in Vanuatu, maybe the government own only 10% of it. All the land belongs to the indigenous people. And I think this is something that also make us put ourselves in a position where we can share our learnings and also what we have in our country across the board as well, by just looking it. And then we feel that, and of course I connect myself with my colleague here, that we have that connection with the land, part of our constitution. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. And I think for us, first, I want to say that in Latin America, I think the Stop Ecocide movement is growing. You can see in the protest on the streets. Can you hear me better now? You can see in the protest of the streets, young people with huge cardboard saying "Stop Ecocide," make Ecocide a law. And I think it's because as Latin Americans, we can relate to what's behind it. In Ecuador, you have Suma Causai and Vivir Mejor. In Colombia, we have Vivir Sabroso. We have a deep connection with the land and the way we understand how it's in some ways sacred. So it really matches. I think it connects with people. It's part of a growing social movement. And this relates more to the previous question, but I think social movements are really powerful to change history and change the legal system. If we think about women's rights, civil rights, these all started by people claiming on the streets that they want better. So I think it's not in our DNA as Latin Americans, but I feel like it's growing, and it will be be continuously growing. And now in Colombia, we have a really progressive government with Gustavo Petro and Francia Marquez. They say Colombia is world power for life. And I think this will be one of the countries that will be soon supporting Stop Ecocide, definitely.
Hello. Hi. So, Kanaskamtin, thank you so much for the discussion today. It's so important, and it's been wonderful to hear all of your different perspectives. My name is Jordan. I'm friends with actually Danny here on stage. And I'm from Canada. I'm First Nations, and I'm also Métis. And so that alone, I don't know if people know the political or jurisdictional climate in Canada, but there's some pretty interesting dynamics there where if you look at First Nations community, FSIN, the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations, but First Nations are, their own sovereign nations, right? And so the laws that govern our nations in Canada for First Nations are a little bit different than what we see, but we're still bound by federal jurisdiction, by federal law, right? And then if you think about provincial law and how it differentiates from federal and First Nation law, and then you look at Métis people who don't have a distinct connection or a land base, right? As told to us by the government, we don't have a land base, so therefore our right and duty to protect the land is a little bit unclear, they say, right? That's not how we see it, but that's kind of how it's recognized by the government. And so my question to you is in terms of Ecocide, when we have these different jurisdictional issues, and in Canada, for example, we have things like Bill C-69, which is supposed to protect our land from further development for uranium mining, different types of exploration, right? But provincial jurisdiction is different, and there's loopholes, and there's ways that people are not abiding by these laws that already exist in Canada. And so how do you see Ecocide and this helping to protect some of that? So say, for example, if a sovereign nation adopted Ecocide, but Canada doesn't necessarily have to abide by that law, like what does that look like? And maybe I'm just not understanding correctly. I don't have a legal background, but I'm very curious as to how that sits and how you see this moving forward. I think if we were to see a Canadian or First Nation from what's known as Canada adopt this, how do they hold Canada accountable to protect and abide by that international law?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. The reality is that at the level of the International Criminal Court, it is national governments that have to agree to ratify the crime. So for it to apply in Canada specifically, Canada would have to ratify it. But the whole, in a sense, part of the point of the way that it is phrased is that it will it creates a kind of base beneath the regulations that are currently in place, that there are so many people avoiding or breaking the laws already because they're at the level of regulation, or they're at the level of kind of obligations and these kinds of things. And a lot of actually environmental law is in that kind of arena. There are relatively few strict prohibitions, but one of the reasons that this definition was given this phrasing of unlawful or wanton acts, it's like, okay, at the moment, you might just be breaching something that you don't take terribly seriously, like the laws that you're saying are in place to potentially protect those areas, those First Nation territories. But if you're breaching that law and you're potentially breaking you're potentially committing a severe level of harm, then you're in the category potentially of ecocide. Now, if Canada ratifies, obviously that's fantastic because you get that gets to be used directly in Canada. But even if Canada didn't ratify, if there were, for example, another jurisdiction that was willing to use universal jurisdiction, then it could apply in that way. There's also the fact that, I mean, some of the biggest polluters like the US, China, Russia are not members of the ICC. But at the same time, they are nonetheless deeply entwined in the global economy. So there is also a kind of entrainment factor here. It's like, if the member states of the International Criminal Court start to move ahead with this, and even just the conversation happening right now with the law not even in place yet, we already know it's starting to influence business decisions, investment decisions. For example, there's an investor network called the International Corporate Governance Network, which is basically has its membership is all the biggest financial firms in the world. They manage over half the world's managed assets, something like 59 trillion. It's insane. They submit a statement to COP, and they submitted one last year and they submitted one this year, and both times they're recommending governments to criminalize ecocide, which is fascinating, because what that means is that those big companies, the ones that are potentially, the people who are putting the money into those big companies, are wanting this rule in place because they're wanting to see the stability in the future, so that at the moment they don't know what to invest in, like what's going to be happening to their money, what's going to be happening over time. So to have that stability is really important. But when we asked the Secretariat why did they actually put this in their statement, they said, firstly, it's about risk stabilization, operational risk, reputational risk, financial risk with investments. But also they said, you know what? They were looking out at the world saying, this is really serious. Something really serious needs to be done. So there is a level at which, the international economic community is also starting to move in this direction. So although an international law has to be ratified nationally, because no international law can automatically override national sovereignty on our planet at the moment, at the same time, there is a way in which, as the world moves in a certain direction, there will be more and more countries coming on board, and more companies, which are often multinationals, having to acknowledge this. So say a company in Canada actually has its seat or its operational office in Belgium, and Belgium's ratified it, oops, there's a possibility there for prosecution. So, it's not necessarily a direct benefit as it would be if Canada ratified, and of course they may. In fact, I have to say that the conversation is quite live in Canada. But even if not, there is still scope for the influence of this being felt.
Thank you. I think we should probably draw to a close quite soon. I wanted to see, Danny, if you wanted to share any thoughts on the Canadian perspective, or if you're happy with that answer. You can pass if you don't want to. Well, the question was specific to, is your community from Canada? Did I get it wrong? Yeah, exactly. The question was specific to Canada, so I wanted to know if you had any answer you wanted to add to that question. But if not, don't worry. Clearly not, don't worry. I wanted to give you space. I love, actually, Jojo, what you said at the end about, why that recommendation's been made the last 2 years, and the element of people looking out the window and realizing, like, we got to do something. And I think that actually is quite moving, because it's kind of worrying to think of all the obstacles and the lobbyists and the kind of vested interests that we're fighting, but actually remembering we're all humans and we're all on this planet together, and many of these vested interests are also like parents, and and thinking about that deep human nature that actually may allow people to wake up, whichever positions of power they may sit in, to make this move feels really encouraging, and actually in a way maybe takes us full circle to the type of oral tradition, common law that we see in Indigenous communities that has been practiced for thousands of years, and we need to resurrect today in a more formal framework. So yeah, I feel encouraged by that. Thank you so much. Thank you all. That was a fascinating conversation. There's going to be a 2-3 minute video now on the movement, so I encourage you to stay and watch that, and maybe we can leave the stage for the video to play. Thank you.
The climate and ecological emergencies have been produced by decades of environmental neglect, harm, and reckless profit-making. They have been disproportionately caused by a handful of privileged government and corporate decision makers in rich countries. And they have been perpetrated without accountability.
Young people all around the world are saying that enough is enough. As the generations most affected, we are leading with urgency, we are leading with clarity and solutions. Today, we present our 4 urgent demands. First, we call governments to recognize ecocide, massive environmental destruction, as a crime under the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court.
Second, we call on governments to explore other legal and rights-based solutions, such as implement domestic laws against ecocide, recognize the rights of nature, ensure the universal human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, request an advisory decision on climate change from the International Court of Justice, respect the land rights of Indigenous communities, uphold the right of future generations to inherit a livable planet.
Third, we call on businesses, civil society organizations, and individuals to center the demands of youth when taking environmental action.
And fourth, we call on decision makers in all sectors to read and to support the following more detailed set of environmental demands that were jointly authored by Youth for Ecocide Law, Earth Guardians, the Global Alliance on the Rights of Nature, Care About Climate, and Youth versus Apocalypse, in preparation for the 27th UNFCCC Conference of Parties.
Let us be clear. We will not be silent, we will not be tokenized, and we will not be excluded from the critical environmental decision-making processes. The global youth voices are here to stay. We are now leading. Follow and support our demands.